A former friend, former coworker, and former classmate of the Idaho 4 murder suspect, BRYAN KOHBERGER, have all spoken out on the BRYAN they all knew. Before we get further into this, please take time to subscribe to this channel. Click the bell beside subscribe to all, that way you'll be notified whenever YouTube sends out notifications. Here we go. First, we're going to hear from the former coworker. Then we're going to hear from the former classmate. And finally, we will hear from BRYAN KOHBERGER's former friend.
He was just your average guy. I met him through some friends, and they told me that he was a little weird. And he was a little socially awkward, I guess you could say. But he wasn't a bad guy. He needed a job, so I worked at a pizza shop at that time, and they were hiring. I said, yeah, come on in and apply, and he did, and he got the job. So I worked with him for a little bit. But he was quiet, though.
What
he
was conversation like with him?
What was that?
Like when you talk with him at work, would he look you in your eyes? Did he have friends? Did he have a girlfriend at the time?
It was so long ago. It was like 2013, but he didn't have a girlfriend. I do remember that. And my wife went to school with him. They graduated together, and she doesn't remember him ever having a girlfriend, and I don't remember him ever having a girlfriend. And he didn't have many friends, so he would do anything to fit in, and would do he just wanted to be liked by everybody. But he wasn't a bad kid. He was all right. And I knew his sister. I went to school with his sister, and I knew his father worked for the school, and I believe his mother did too. But his family, they were all nice people, and his dad was always really nice to me, very polite. But I never thought that he would do something like that.
Good copy. So we've heard from some people that surrounded him that there may have been drug use in his life prior as well. Did you know him to use drugs or anything like that, sir?
Yeah, he did use drugs. That's how I really know him too. He was a big heroin addict, and so was I. I got 6 years clean now. I work in treatment and everything, but back then I was using, and so that's how I know for a fact he was using. I've got high with him a couple times and used with him, and I remember one night we went out, and his car broke down, and his dad had to come out, and he got pretty angry because his car broke down and everything, and we couldn't get what we needed that night. I knew other people that dealt drugs, and we would deliver drugs to him a lot. And so that's when I heard about this case. I haven't heard from him in so long. And then I heard about this, and it said that he was going to college. I said, I haven't heard from him. I guess that's what he's been doing. He must have cleaned up. I know he was in and out of rehab a couple times, but he really did. He cleaned up and was going to college all these years.
Rich, I'm short on time, but I got to ask you one last question. We've heard from people that he had a track record of being inappropriate, borderline offensive to women. Did you ever see that in any of your interactions with him and interactions with women?
Not in my time knowing him. I've never seen him ever act like that towards women. I've never seen him come off that way ever towards anybody.
And I woke up to all these tweets that were like, oh, they got the guy. And of course, this has been something that everyone in Pullman has been following, everyone in the whole Pullman, Moscow area. And so, I look on my phone and I see the guy's name and I see the picture. And I'm thinking, that looks a lot like my TA who's also named Brian, but that would be crazy. And so I went and I checked my email, to see the emails I'd had with him, and the name matched and everything. And yeah, it was just totally jarring, totally shocking to realize that this person that had been, kind of grading my papers was, allegedly this horrible murderer. Entirely. All our interactions came in the form of the class, and not even office hours. It was all within the confines of a lecture hall. He was pretty strict as far as grading goes. When he came into class, he was very, not super mentally present. He would stand up at the front, look at the ground. He had a lot of boilerplate responses he would give people rather than, maybe something he had thought up on the spot. It seemed like he would be, he'd come in knowing what he was going to say to like most interactions. And then when he would grade your papers, he would be grading you on what he ended up calling like a higher standard. But what it really felt like to us was he was grading us like he would have graded himself as a PhD student. And so that was just kind of like, we were all annoyed by him. And so I knew his name, I knew like, oh, TA Bryan, like he sucks at this. Like he's grading us too harshly. And that was like an annoyance. But obviously beyond that, we just thought he was a little weird and kind of, a bad grader. Yeah. He actually only left me good comments, which is just kind of silly. Like the only ones I could send in were nice ones, but for most people, he was being pretty harsh in the comments. I just, for whatever reason, he was being pretty good to me. Yeah, actually, we had our professor was big on the idea that like if we're all going to be attorneys someday, then we have to know how to argue our case, and so he scheduled a day where everyone came in ready to argue to get their grades up, and he brought in Bryan, and he was like, all right, go at him. And he had Bryan stand up, and everyone was, like a few people were on his side because they wanted to keep their high grades and not like have questions be cut out or whatever. But for the most part, it was like, half of a 150-person class just asking him all these real critical questions, and he would answer. And he'd actually, he tried pretty hard to defend himself, which was the kind of thing that our professor loved. He wanted the like courtroom environment. And so, so there was just a period of class where we were all sort of arguing about this. Not, I mean, it wasn't like yelling or anything, but it was certainly conflict. Yeah, yeah. We just, it would have been about a month before winter break when like the murders happened. And we didn't obviously build our framework for this around that because we had no reason to connect him to that, at the time. But definitely around then, um, he started grading everybody just a hundreds, not like you pretty much if you turned something in, you were getting high marks, and he stopped leaving notes. It was just he seemed preoccupied is what I would have said at the time. And now obviously he seems like he was probably pretty preoccupied. But it was, yeah, it was much easier. You turn in whatever you wanted pretty much, and he was just grading them up and sending them back. Like, yeah, yeah, absolutely. He probably that I saw he was always a little bit spotty on whether or not he'd come to class because he had whatever PhD stuff over the top of it. But the couple times that he did come after or around that time period, I remember him. He had like a little bit more facial hair, just like stubble, but definitely less like well kept than he was, and he was a little quieter. He didn't, he used to stand up at the start of class and like talk about some stuff sometimes. And this time he didn't really do that at all.
For people like Casey Arntz, the news of the arrest hits close to home. Her mom calling to break the news.
And she said the person they arrested was BRYAN KOHBERGER. And immediately I freaked out naturally. I went back inside work and I called about 8 of my friends because it was terrifying. It was a shock because there's literally 7 billion people in this world, and I know him. I was friends with him. Like, that's terrifying.
Arntz lives in Virginia Beach, but grew up in the Poconos and attended Pleasant Valley High School. She tells us she became friends with BRYAN KOHBERGER through her younger brother during their time in school.
We just hung out and talked, and that's what it was. It wasn't anything crazy, just a typical friendship.
Arntz says she hopes his arrest will shed more light on the case for the sake of the 4 victims and their families.
I didn't want to think about what even happened out there. I just want the families to have clarity. I want them to have some type of just answers to questions that they don't have. And I know that we won't get those answers, or they won't get those answers until they actually hear from him. And the police release that information. And it's just, I want them to have clarity, and I want them to be able to have peace after all this is said and done.